sometimes 5 and sometimes 1. The white shadow that steals close without showing their true form. They are the Shadow Warriors of Justice, the Science Ninja Team, Gatchaman. Kagaku Ninjatai Gatchaman, or Science Ninja Team Gatchaman as it's more commonly known outside of Japan, is a 1972 animated series developed by Tatsunoko. Though it wasn't their first production, that would be 1965 Space Ace, it'd go on to be one of the company's flagship series. The conceit of the show is relatively straightforward. Dr. Nambu, a member of the fictitious International Science Organization, employs a group of 5 specially trained youth to work against the ambitions of the terrorist organization Galactor. They are Ken Washio, themed after an eagle, Jun, themed after a swan, Joe Asakura, themed after a condor, Jinpei, taking after the swallow, and Ryu, the team's pilot who's themed after an owl. Together, using the fighting style and gadgets entrusted to them by Dr. Nambu, they work against the machinations of Galactor and its supposed leader, Kate. Gatchaman came about in a landscape that had just been graced with Kamen Rider, which gave the henshin genre a huge surge in popularity. Gatchaman was meant to evoke the spirit of henshin shows and combine them with the flair of Western superheroes, most evident in the character designs of the main heroes. This wasn't the first time Tatsunoko deliberately channeled Western influence for their works. Much of Speed Racer's conception and production was done with America in mind, and it's no surprise that Speed Racer in particular went on to become their first internationally known show. Some poor negotiations on the part of the folks handling the legal side of things for Tatsunoko licensing Speed Racer out west meant that they saw pretty much no profit or even credit from the show's Western popularity. On the other side of the coin, Gatchaman's domestic popularity allowed them to recoup their production costs pretty quickly. Given the original show's popularity, the IP has received everything from movies, sequel series, radio dramas, several OVA releases, live-action adaptations, remakes that never finished production, you name it. They'd even pop up for the occasional crossover, like the early 90s Time Bokan OVA. The show was one of the few Tatsunoko productions that did make it over to the West in various forms. The first was the 1978 version titled Battle of the Planets. This was a heavily edited version of the show meant to appeal more to Western audiences, with some changes being a little nonsensical, like the episode order being switched, or perfectly normal characters now being made into artificial life forms for some reason. Following that was 1985's G-Force Guardians of Space. This was a relatively faithful adaptation of the first 80 or so episodes of the show, though again the names were changed, and the last few episodes were never covered, leaving this version without a proper finale. 20 years later, ADV Films would license the series as simply Gatchaman, providing all 105 episodes of the original series, uncut, with a new English dub, and packaged with some absolutely insane art from legendary comic book artist Alex Ross. Growing up, this was one of a handful of Tatsunoko shows I can vaguely remember watching occasionally as a kid. Cartoon Network used to air Speed Racer reruns a lot in the early 90s, which I watched because my parents were fans. Tekkaman Blade's Western version as Technoman was a show I really enjoyed on UPN back in the day, and Battle of the Planets would sometimes get shown late at night on Cartoon Network until about the late 90s. When Tatsunoko vs. Capcom was first announced in 2008, my response, like most Westerners, was something along the lines of, "Tatsu who?" But then seeing images of the game alongside its announcement, I recognized the bird dude with the cape from the show I'd sometimes watch when I sneakily stayed up past my bedtime as a kid. It makes all the sense in the world that Gatchaman would be paired off directly opposite of Street Fighter for Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, like having Kyo against Ryo for Capcom vs. SNK, or Cyclops against him for X-Men vs. Street Fighter did. Fittingly, Gatchaman also gets about the same chunk of representation in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom as Street Fighter ultimately did, getting 2 characters in the original release of the game to Street Fighter 3, but making up that difference with an additional character in Ultimate All-Stars. It's been a while since we've done a multi-character video, especially one for characters with a history as rich as theirs, so this one's gonna be dense. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into the history of Ken the Eagle, Jun the Swan, and Joe the Condor in Capcom's Versus games. Ken Washio is the leader of the Science Ninja Team as Ken the Eagle, and the team's tactical expert. He has a pretty strong sense of justice, and this spills over into how he leads the team on a regular basis. Ken's father was a pilot who disappeared during a flight, something that still occasionally haunts him. Later on in the series, it'd be revealed that Red Impulse, allies to the Gatchamen that have helped Ken in particular out of some dicey situations, is in fact his long-lost father. Ken was raised for most of his life by Dr. Nambu, who also took in Joe in his youth as well. Ken and Joe butt heads pretty frequently, but know they can absolutely depend on each other when the chips are down. Ken himself is usually pretty level-headed, but in extreme situations is prone to getting swept up in the moment and acting erratically, usually requiring the rest of the team to help bring him back down to earth. As the cover for his activities as part of the Science Ninja, Ken works as a pilot handing deliveries. He usually ends up being pretty popular with women, but Ken himself usually either struggles to reciprocate said interest or just has it fly over his head, much to the annoyance of people like Jun. He's extremely capable in a fight though. He's trained in judo, kendo, karate, and boxing among others, and outside of Joe, is probably the character most often seen engaging in hand-to-hand combat. Ken himself was among the first characters to be announced alongside Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Cross Generation of Heroes in 2008, alongside Kashan, Ryu, and Chun-Li. His theme song in Cross Generation of Heroes is an arrangement of Gatchaman no Uta. Though it's the most well-known composition from the show, it wasn't actually used as the show's intro theme until around episode 23 or so, instead serving as the credits theme for the first 22 episodes. We'll talk about that original intro song a little later. The original theme was sung by Masato Shimon and went on to become one of the most iconic pieces of music to be associated with Tatsunoko properties. Shimon is something of an icon himself, having been the composer and vocalist for Ultra 7, several Kamen Rider shows, and a whole host more. Shimon, to my understanding, also holds the distinction of having, to this day, the highest selling music single in Japanese history, Oyoge Tayaki-kun. The Cross Generation of Heroes arrangement is pretty nice all things considered, thanks to a pretty smooth lead guitar. It's not the first time the song has been arranged for a video game. It was also remixed for Tatsunoko Fight on the PS1, but I'd say this ranks among the best versions of the song overall. His voice actor in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is Katsuji Mori, who also voiced him in the original series as well. Mori is also a seasoned voice actor, having done voice work in Getter Robo, Fist of the North Star, and way more, though one voice in particular he was responsible for was Neo in Dragon Ball Z. More related to Tatsunoko, he's also the voice actor of the original Tekken Man in his home series, as well as Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. Really cool that he was still doing VA work then. I also want to shout out Ken's Cross Generation of Heroes art as drawn by Shinkira. It's a pretty cool recreation of the pose that's used at the end of the show's intro theme. The now closed website for Ultimate All-Stars even uses this background framing as the backdrop for all of the character profiles on the site. As the leader, Ken sets an example for the rest of the Science Ninja, and as it so happens, he sets a pretty good baseline standard for Tatsunoko characters in this game as well. Bird Run is a pretty solid projectile all around. Between Tatsunoko vs. Capcom's universal mobility options and his teleports, he can move around the screen fairly easily. In Cross Generation of Heroes specifically, he has a hilarious jab infinite. And Bird Run being a solid projectile transfers to his general team utility, since it's his assist. On the flip side of things, most of his supers are pretty situational and require explicit setup. His teleports are punishable, and easily so if the opponent has awareness of how they operate. And though I mentioned his supers being situational, his level 3 deserves special mention, because you're probably not landing that one without a partner. I mentioned the jab infinite, but Ken in general has some pretty hilarious infinites in Cross Generation of Heroes. Most people jumped into TVC with Ultimate All-Stars, which got a huge overhaul balance-wise, and as a result, a lot of folks don't know how deeply wacky Cross Generation of Heroes got from a balance standpoint. Ken has one command normal, an overhead kick done with forward and medium. This move is an overhead, and notably, Ken is considered to be in the air when utilizing it. Ken's first move is Bird Run, a boomerang projectile done with a sonic boom charge motion. This is a decent projectile that hits when flying away and again on its return trip. This move can notably be done in the air as well. The button strength dictates the projectile's trajectory. Bird Run is Ken's handy projectile in the TV series, and he uses it pretty liberally, usually to nail Galactor soldiers that might be too far away to engage in a timely manner. It's been referenced in both Japanese and, surprisingly enough, American pop culture. Its visual design seems to be one of the main inspirations for Robin's bird rings in the 2003 Teen Titans cartoon. Considering the creative forces behind that show are self-admitted huge anime fans, and Gatchaman in particular has been pretty directly referenced multiple times in the show, I'm gonna say the inspiration was intentional. Bird Shoot is done with a Dragon Punch motion and attack. This is a fast charging attack whose angle is determined by the strength of the attack button. Light goes forward. Medium goes diagonally upwards. And heavy goes straight up. Random flight is done with a reverse Dragon Punch motion and attack, the attack strength dictating where on screen Ken appears. Ken doesn't have the ability to teleport or anything in the show proper, but he does tend to be able to move at speeds fast enough to make him appear as a blur to all but those moving as fast as he is. That said, the move name itself is taken from episode 76 of the anime. There, it's an evasive flight maneuver meant to disorient Bird Katse. Eagle Rush is done with a half circle back and any attack in the air. This is a series of aerial kicks, the amount of kicks increasing with the strength of the attack button pressed. This one's kinda tricky to use in combos because of the startup, and whiffing it leaves him wide open. Ken's first hyper combo is Gatchaman Attack Lightning Strike, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 attacks.
Very good!
Ken initiates this move with a flip kick similar to his launcher. If it hits, he initiates an automated attack sequence where he assaults the opponent with multiple bird shoots until a final one that seems to come from 2 directions. Considering the startup for this and the fact that it can only be done grounded, this isn't the hyper combo that sees the most use from Ken. It's not unusable, but you have to really work to make it viable. His second hyper combo is Gatchaman Attack Bird Smash, done with a Dragon Punch motion and 2 attacks.
Good!
This one is a multi-hitting super version of Bird Shoot and can be done in the air as well. This is the super you'll likely be using the most, as most of Ken's kit easily combos into it, and it comes out relatively fast as well, so it's a great way to tack on some damage at the end of a combo. Interestingly enough, another special move by the same name showed up in a previous fighting game, Tatsunoko Fight on the PlayStation 1, where it's a charging tackle as well, though it's more similar to how Bird Shoot works in TVC, being a multi-directional tackle. Ken's level 3 is Science Ninpo Phoenix, done with a quarter circle back and 2 attacks. Ken jumps to the wall behind him and performs a diving kick. If successful, a cinematic plays where a flaming phoenix appears and hits the opponent multiple times. Because the super flash doesn't initiate until Ken hits the wall, this is a very tricky super to combo into solo, and almost always requires an assist, a DHC call, or a hard read to use successfully. The flaming bird that appears is the God Phoenix, the Science Ninja Team's flying vessel. It's a fast-moving jet most times, but in particularly dangerous situations, it can take the form of a fiery phoenix. This does, however, put the team at risk, as this pressurizes the inside of the jet, putting immense physical strain on the team. This is another technique that also appeared in Tatsunoko Fight, where it was Ken's super move and also did multiple hits. Ken's assist is Bird Run.
Assist, okay!
And here are Ken's colors. And here's Ken's endings in both Curse Generation of Heroes and Ultimate All-Stars. Jun the Swan is the third in command of the Science Ninja and the team's resident electronics and explosives expert. Jun grew up an orphan, both her parents dying when she was young. While she was initially put into the care of an orphanage, she ran away, though in doing so, she herself discovered an abandoned toddler. She named him Jinpei, and both would go on to be taken in by Dr. Nambu and join the Science Ninja, becoming something of an older sister figure to him. Jun's civilian cover job is running a snack cafe that usually doubles as a meeting spot for the team alongside being her and Jinpei's place of residence. Over her time with the team, she works closely with and starts developing feelings for Ken, something Jinpei occasionally teases her about. Like we established earlier though, Ken just really isn't focused on romantic relationships of any kind. Not much else is really known of Jun's childhood. Even her last name is never revealed. A childhood friend of hers does show up, though as things would turn out, he was now a member of Galactor, putting them on opposite sides. Her trademark weapon is a specialized yo-yo with multiple functions. She can use it as a flail, she can shock people with it, and she can even attach explosives to it and detonate them by sending a charge through the yo-yo wire. Jun is actually kind of an important character from a media standpoint, considering she's one of the earliest examples of an action girl that I can think of in anime. On top of being the only woman on a team full of men, she more than pulls her weight in battle and is their go-to demolitions expert. Simply put, Jun walked so a lot of other heroines can run, and that's absolutely worth highlighting. Jun's theme in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is an arrangement of Taosei Galactor, or Destroy Galactor, which served as the opening theme for Gatchaman for its first 22 episodes, before being swapped with Gatchaman no Uta and becoming the show's outro theme from that point onwards. It also tends to play at the end of episodes where a mission more or less goes successfully. This one's a pretty faithful arrangement altogether, and I love that both Gatchaman themes get represented in the game. Yeah, it's a bit more slower paced than Gatchaman no Uta, but I couldn't imagine her theme here being anything else. Her voice actor in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is also her longtime VA, Kazuko Sugiyama. Outside of Jun, she's also played characters in Dragon Ball, Dr. Slump, Tekka Man, Pokemon, and interestingly, was the voice of Bomberman in most games in that series in the mid to late 90s, including the super underrated Bomberman 64. Jun was revealed for Tatsunoko vs. Capcom pretty close to the game's initial arcade release in Japan. However, she and Roll on the Capcom side were time-locked characters. They weren't available in the arcade version until a few weeks later to coincide with the release of the Wii version of the game. Jun's a pretty damn solid character. She has great offensive tools, good mix-ups, and she's a great team player. Her bombs and her command normals make for some pretty solid offensive pressure overall. She has some cool looking combos that are as practical as they are flashy. Speaking of being practical, her level 3 is way easier to work with than Ken's and can be comboed into a variety of ways solo. And Talon Burst is also a really great DHC tool thanks to its duration and how safe it is. If your opponent decides to play defensively, however, her bombs aren't as effective. And while she does have some good mix-ups, she does rely on assists for some of her most reliable ways to open up opponents. And somewhat inversely to that first con, if her opponent decides to get in her face relentlessly, her bombs also become a less effective threat. Generally speaking, they're fantastic mid-range, and kind of risky outside of that. Jun has two command normals to highlight. The first is Spinning Sweep, done with forward and medium attack. This looks like a standard command normal, but it has a deceptive amount of invincibility. However, you can only combo off of it with a Baroque cancel. Double Strike is done with forward and heavy attack. The second hit is an overhead, and can actually combo into her launcher somewhat cleanly, so it's decent in combos. Jun's first special move is String Bomb, done with a quarter circle forward and attack. She swings her yo-yo and attaches a bomb to the opponent on hit. Jun can attach up to 5 bombs onto an opponent, and they actually have some interplay with her next special move. Bingo is done with a quarter circle back and attack. Jun poses, and whatever bombs were attached to the opponent detonate. This can be blocked though, but since Jun can initiate this at any time, it's actually a pretty decent way to make her block string safe. These can be detonated in the air as well. These two specials are of course based on her yo-yo's ability to attach explosives to objects and remotely detonate them. Lightning Kick is done with a Dragon Punch motion and any attack button. The attack strength dictates the move's properties. Light is a fake out, medium hits once, and heavy goes higher and hits twice. While for better or worse, Jun is known for doing all kinds of spinning aerial flip kicks in the show, this attack name doesn't actually come from any episode, but is instead shouted out in the lyrics of Taosei Galactor. Dancing Swan is done with a reverse Dragon Punch motion and attack. This attack starts with a single hit, and if not blocked, goes into a quick automated combo, the damage and number of hits increasing with attack button strength. Swan Rush is done with a reverse Dragon Punch motion, and specifically in the air.
Yes! Good!
This is similar to Ken's Eagle Rush, though it's a bit faster. If all the hits connect, this knocks the opponent down. Jun's first hyper combo is Talon Burst, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 attacks. Jun swings her yo-yos across the stage multiple times, attaching bombs to the opponent if not blocked, and finishes them off with an automated bingo, detonating any and all bombs on the opponent. This one can be also done in the air, and makes for a pretty great DHC call thanks to its range and its duration. Mirage Swan is done with a reverse Dragon Punch motion and 2 attacks.
Very good!
This one is a powered up version of Dancing Swan, and like that move, can only be done on the ground. If a bomb is attached to an opponent before she does this super, she can actually use a bingo right after it ends to score an OTG hit on the opponent.
Wonderful!
Jun also shares a level 3 with Ken, Science Ninpo Phoenix, done with the quarter circle back in 2 attacks.
Wonderful!
Right off the bat, this version kicks Ken's in the ass. The initial hit is swift and easily comboed into by herself, and it doesn't scale too harshly either. It's a good combo ender if you have the meter to spare and you think it'll kill. This can also be done in the air. Jun's assist is String Bomb.
Attack! Assist okay!
Here are Jun's colors. Jun's color 4 is likely a reference to the Blackbirds from Gatchaman. They're a group of highly trained assassins themed after the Science Ninja under the employ of Galactor, and wear predominantly black outfits with similar bird-styled helmets. Jun has one of my favorite endings in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, 1 because it's interactive, and 2 because said interaction is actually a parody of Chun-Li's ending from Super Street Fighter 2, where the player can choose whether or not the character retires and settles into civilian life, or continues their heroics. Here are both possible endings, along with the Cross Generation of Heroes animated ending. Do keep in mind that the animated ending is the same regardless of which ending choice you make.
姉ちゃんたち頼みがあんだけどさ。
シートばかり金を。おいてめえら聞いて。
なかなかやるじゃない。ジュンさん、すごいです。
Joe Asakura is the second in command of the Science Ninja as Joe the Condor, behind Ken. He's the team's resident marksman and weapons expert, and easily the most abrasive member, though he's a nice dude deep down. Of all the members of the team, Joe is easily the one with the most involved backstory, which gets explored in detail over the course of the original series. Joe was born George Asakura, the child of two scientists. He and his parents were the target of an assassination attempt by Galactor, and while his parents were killed, he miraculously survived, though the incident still haunts him to this day. His parents weren't randomly targeted though. They were Galactor scientists themselves, though they were planning on defecting, which is why Galactor went after them. He was found by Dr. Nambu, who helped fake his death and gave him the new name of Joe to hide him from Galactor. Though Joe wouldn't learn the full scope of the circumstances behind his parents' death until well into his adolescence, the incident instilled a deep hatred for Galactor within him, and this gets multiplied tenfold when he learns he's the child of Galactor members. Joe was taken in alongside Ken by Dr. Nambu, the two of them eventually becoming part of the Science Ninja together. Where Ken likes to take his time to assess threats and develop counter-tactics for situations, Joe likes to punch first and ask questions later, much to Ken's dismay. When not on active duty, Joe is an avid racer, often competing in racing circuits, though trouble always seems to follow him regardless of whether or not he's on duty. Being the team's resident lone wolf, he sometimes gets episodes that focus mostly on him, showing that he's a capable enough man on his own. By the way, have you ever noticed Joe's idle animation? He looks like he's having a hard time staying upright, almost as if his equilibrium is a little messed up. It's actually pretty cool looking, and I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking he's a drunken fighter or something. In truth, this idle animation cycle actually references a plot point from late in the original series. Joe starts experiencing splitting headaches and blurry vision, which starts to impact his performance on the team and missions. Not wanting to be taken off duty, he secretly goes to an unlicensed doctor, but he can't keep it from Dr. Nambu for long after he passes out while escaping from a Galactor trap. As it turns out, Joe has an illness stemming from brain damage he received in an explosion, with his condition being bad enough that he has just over a week to live. The explosion that caused said brain damage is never specified in the show and is actually the subject of debate among fans. Most seem to agree that there's two likely moments seen in the show that could possibly fit though. The first is the assassination of his parents by Galactor agents, who did so using a bomb disguised as a rose, and the flashback shows that he was indeed injured by this. The other possibility comes from the events of episode 20 of the show, where early in the episode, during a confrontation with Galactor agents, Joe goes out of his way to save a puppy, and is caught off guard by a Galactor rocket, sustaining a head injury from shrapnel. Said shrapnel is removed at the end of the episode, but it's possible that this is the incident that could have incited that injury, or if the first injury was the one that did it, this probably just made it worse. Either way, the last few episodes involve a final confrontation with Galactor, but Joe goes off to fight them on his own, figuring that he has nothing to lose since he's on borrowed time anyway. While he does pass away before the final confrontation, a feather shuriken he threw earlier in the episode that got stuck in some gears ends up being the catalyst for the team's ultimate victory over Galactor. And then in the sequel series he comes back as a cyborg. Long story. Joe was one of 3 Tatsunoko characters added to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars after only having a brief cameo in Cross Generation of Heroes. To unlock him, beat Arcade Mode with 6 Tatsunoko characters. His voice actor in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is Isao Sasaki, reprising his role as Joe from the original series, as well as every other piece of Gatchaman media prior to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. He's had roles in films and TV shows both prior to and after voicing Joe, but perhaps most interesting is his singing talent, having sung the theme songs for Hurricane Palomar, Neo-Human Kashan, Getter Robo, and Space Battleship Yamato, among many others. The way he allegedly landed those singing gigs is also pretty interesting. The story goes that he and the rest of the Gatchaman voice actors and staff were at a party celebrating the show's production wrapping up, and he, as a joke, started belting out the lyrics to Gatchaman no Uta. This apparently impressed people that attended, and word got out to a producer who approached him about lending his voice to some other music projects. He was also notably the narrator in Tatsunoko Fight as well. Joe, despite generally being known as the brawler of the group, actually has the most gadgets on hand in TVC of any of the Science Ninja. His standing light is one of a handful in the game that hits low, a fantastic trait to have in this game. His feather projectile is similar to Zero's Buster, but arguably even trickier. Because it doesn't have levels associated with it, the opponent will have no idea it's coming until it's fired, since there's no visual indication on Joe that he's preparing one. And he has flat out some of the coolest looking combos in the game. Of the three Science Ninja, however, Joe is the most execution heavy, and while that's not a bad thing at all on its own, Ken and Jun are far easier to play with arguably better reward. For whatever reason, none of Joe's specials in this game deal chip damage at all, which can suck in down to the wire scramble situations, which can happen pretty often in this game. And Bird Missile exists pretty much solely for dedicated big brain setups into it, or for flashy combo situations. It's not bad, but it's very much a don't use this unless you know exactly what you're doing kind of move. Joe doesn't have anything in the way of command normals, instead having a set of somewhat varied special moves. First is Wild Lasso, done with a Sonic Boom charge motion. Joe fires a claw from his pistol-esque weapon, and if it hits the opponent, Joe reels them in before shooting them multiple times. The angle it fires at is dictated by the strength of the attack button pressed. The Science Ninja all have their own custom weapons and sidearms, and one of Joe's favorites is a modular air gun. Though it can shoot projectiles, it can also be modified to shoot a claw for grappling purposes, or even a drill for, well, drilling. Next up is Savage Shot, done with a Dragon Punch motion and attack. Joe fires several shots upwards at a diagonal angle. This isn't a very easy attack to use because of the angle it hits at, but it does have some niche applications. The Aryu version of this can also OTG. Joe's most well-known weapon by far is his Feather Shuriken, done by holding any attack button for a bit and then letting go. This is similar to Zero's Buster in that it's a charged move, and holding it requires some negative edge input management. Unlike Hyper Zero Blaster though, there's no visual indication that Joe is even preparing one. He can notably also cancel his specials into the launch of one of these, which can make him safe in most cases and even lead to combo extensions. Joe's Feather Shuriken are sharp enough to pin people to walls, something Joe's definitely taken advantage of, though he's also used them to disarm people and weapons as well. Battering Ram is done with a quarter circle forward in any attack. Joe does a slow, lumbering kick forward, the attack strength dictating how the opponent is hit. The light version does a crumple, which can potentially be comboed off of. The medium version causes a standing stagger state, which can also be comboed off of. And the heavy version is a kick with super armor that wall bounces. Cactus Bunker is a counter move, done with a half circle back and attack motion. Joe turns his back to the opponent briefly, and if the opponent attacks him, Joe counters with a stylish single shot from his gun. It's honestly one of the coolest moves in the game, but like any counter move, throwing it out with no purpose will probably get you killed quickly. Joe's first hyper combo is Condor Magnum, done with the quarter circle forward and 2 attack buttons. Joe throws 2 volleys of Feather Shuriken before hitting the opponent with a devastating punch. This is one of Joe's more reliable combo enders and can be done in the air. There's a glitch where if you DHC on the exact same frame that the second round of feathers hits on, Joe will glitch out and remain stuck on screen while his partner is tagged in. Things can get even weirder from there, like Joe becoming invisible when tagged in. Understandably, this glitch is banned in competitive play. Joe's second hyper combo is Bird Missile, done with a Dragon Punch motion in 2 attacks. Joe calls in the God Phoenix, which lays down some cover fire before firing a bird missile that flies off screen. After 5 seconds, real life seconds, not in-game seconds, the bird missile strikes the screen, hitting everyone that happens to be grounded, including Joe himself. This super kinda feels like it exists solely for the galaxy-brained players that have super messed up setups centered around comboing off the missile strike with specific partners, and I kinda love it for that. Some of y'all might see it as a waste of a super, and some of us see unbelievable swag potential. That's the magic of fighting games. Bird missiles are a weapon the God Phoenix can fire that have devastating power. They're dangerous enough that most of the team only uses these as a last resort when most other things have failed. I say most because of Joe. Joe loves these bird missiles. We've already established that Joe's very much a fight first, ask questions later kind of guy, but if Joe had his way, he'd solve all of their problems with bird missiles. His eagerness to just blow up their opposition is one of the many recurring things that puts him at odds with Ken, believing him to be too passive to do what needs to be done. Seriously, a lot of the time the team has to literally physically restrain him from pressing the button to fire them. It's such a big part of his character. Even his ending in this game is just the setup for a stop using bird missiles all the time gag. In fact, Joe momentarily hesitating to use one way later in the series is part of what clues Ken into the health problems Joe's been hiding from the team. Joe's level 3 is Science Ninpo Tornado Fighter, done with a half circle back in 2 attacks. Joe kicks the opponent before Ken appears and kicks the opponent as well. They then initiate a spinning attack that creates a large, heavily damaging tornado. This does a decent chunk of damage and is pretty easily comboed into. One neat detail is that Ken is usually the character that shows up for this, but if you're running a team of Joe and Jun, she'll show up for this instead. This is a technique done multiple times in the show, usually with all 5 characters at once. The team have pulled it off with only 2 or 3 people as well. Joe's assist is Savage Shot.
Assist okay.
Here are Joe's colors. And here's Joe's ending. I do want to point out that Joe's ending is one of the very few times Capcom's acknowledged Haunting Ground, which is pretty great. The Gatchaman characters actually have a few special intros with each other and other characters.
お手柔らかにお願いね。覚悟はいいわね。手加減なんかいらないわよ。
やりづらいな。
どこからでもどうぞ。
一戦のつもりで来るんだ。
手加減なんかいらないわよ。
民間人がなぜここに。
Okay, let's not get too worked up.
縄の竜、面白い。かかってこい。
おー、全力で行くぜ。マジで行くぜ。
一戦のつもりで来るんだ。
来い、ケン。
Galactor Base is the Gatchaman stage in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, taking place in, well, one of Galactor's bases. This stage actually seems to be a combination of two specific Galactor bases, the main one that Bird Kate operates from, and a flying base manned by a high-ranking Galactor member seen in the show's very first episode. The architecture, most notably the platforms and how they're positioned, as well as the room's circular shape, is a dead ringer for the flying Galactor base in episode 1. As you hit the opponent with hyper combos on this stage, you'll occasionally see Galactor soldiers fall over the railings in the background, which is pretty funny. The stage takes place on a moving platform that ascends and descends between various levels in the base. It was thought for a while that you can actually influence the path the platform takes with hard knockdowns, but after a bunch of testing, I can pretty safely debunk that. It only seems to initiate the aforementioned Galactor Grunt Easter egg. One of the levels the platform travels to has a large reactor core, its surroundings glowing orange. This is again taken from the flying Galactor base in episode 1. In the background, also traveling between different levels, is Bird Kate, the main antagonist of the show. They remain elusive to capture for most of the show. In fact, Kate actually captures one or more of the team on a fairly regular basis and have almost killed them multiple times. Kate's identity is also a mystery for a while, though after Dr. Nambu does some digging, he can surmise that Kate has an IQ of 280, but can't seem to pull up any more consistent info. Kate can be seen going into a chamber in this stage, where a giant figure appears before them. This chamber is also commonly depicted in Gatchaman episodes as well. This imposing figure he consults with is X, the true mastermind behind Galactor. He's believed to be an alien life form sent to conquer Earth and build Galactor up from a small, almost mafia-esque criminal organization to the feared terrorist group they become known as. X is also responsible for Bird Kate's current existence. X manipulated a set of opposite-sex fraternal twins in the womb and caused them to fuse, both of them inhabiting the same body. Kate would involuntarily shift between birth personas growing up, though they later learn to control it later on in life, allowing them to appear as any gender they pleased. This also explains Kate's IQ. It's not a singular person's IQ of 280, but rather the combined total of two people in one body. Kate was one of several characters on the Tatsunoko side actually considered for the game's roster at one point, but didn't make the cut. The theme for this stage is honestly one of my favorites in the game, and it's also a big fan favorite. It's probably the most well-known track in the game outside of Orbital Ring. I actually tend to unintentionally associate this track with Joe in my head, because the first pre-release gameplay reveal video ever shown for him had him and Jun fighting on this stage. And I swear, I watched that trailer more than I did actual TV for most of the fall of 2009. This stage overall is one that often comes to mind first when I think of locales from this game. I think the surprisingly bright colors and catchy music really does a lot to make this stage memorable. For as amazing as Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is, it's still easily the most obscure game out of the Capcom-produced Versus games. And that's not so much the fault of the game, as much as it is where and when the game released. And that's a shame, because there's some cool ass characters in it. Case in point, the Gatchaman. Unlike, say, the Yatterman crew, you can count on one hand the number of Gatchaman related video games out there, and Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is probably the most recognizable one of them all, which, hey, I guess was part of the plan, I suppose. I think they did a fantastic job with all three characters overall, though if I had to state a personal favorite of the three, I think the team really went a bit above and beyond for Joe in particular. Between his stylish moveset, his idle pose, and just his general portrayed attitude, Capcom and Aiden did a fantastic job making him appeal to people that may not have even heard of the series in the first place. And I think that goes for all three characters too. I know at least a handful of people that started or at least attempted to get into the series thanks to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. That's going to do it for this video though. As always, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.